Operational. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 10th of February 2025 in the year of Trumplandia. And remember, our cute little WordPress.com has plenty of stuff on there. In fact, I just shared a post from there on my little Tortugan lecture from 2009. Sorry, I'm on a little bit late today, but I've been knee deep in cosmology material for volume 2 of Rocks Were There, diving into all the little ins and outs of cosmic background radiation and how creationists and steady staters and that are dealing with the material. I have piles of stuff folding into all the neat material that I have. I'm learning a lot of the scholarship and some of the background material that's really kind of funky. Like my typical procedure on a topic is to get the data field assessed first, and then dive into how creationists have dealt with that to see how they're reacting. And so topics that will have arisen in my initial data field discussion turn out then to get little spin. Henry Moore's, for example, bringing up some old cosmology stuff, misspelling a guy's name in the process, all those little fiddly bits and that get stuck down in the footnotes. But anyway, off to our exciting topic of the day. As you know, we are continuing Titans, and isn't that a wonderful picture? Everything about this thing is just beautiful to look at, and if only its content were as viable as that. As you know, we're still on the tail end of pterosaurs for this particular chapter. Still gee whiz territory. They cite a 2006 paper from Wilkinson et al. On the impact of their wing lift relating to their pteroid bone, which is a little thing sticking up from the digits. One of the digits, after all, is extremely extended, and there's one that kind of sticks up. And Wilkinson, a rod-like finger extension that articulated at the wrist. Sarfati and Tay draw on this one paper, which is a perfectly fine paper, but as usual, there's a little more to the story, which Sarfati and Tay either didn't know about or decided not to pay attention to, which is there was a certain amount of pushback as to, was this interpretation, hello, Purple, was this interpretation in fact accurate or not? So there's a Palmer and Dyke 2010 that I'll be putting a link up to as well. But of much greater import is that cute little pteroid bone and the issue of pterosaur phylogeny. Now, for those of you not up on your pterosaur paleontology, critters that are relatively tiny and have relatively hollow, small bones, and lightweight flyers have a tendency to do that, often have a really poor fossil record. So you have a certain amount of persnicketiness in relation to early birds, but we know in terms of early bats and pterosaurs, a lot of big holes are going on there because they're very, very fragile critters, and they're only popping up in Lagerpetids contexts typically. Ta-da! Which relates to the Dwayne Gish Bermuda Triangle defense that I have discussed in previous episodes, as well as on the Troubles in Paradise website, the various texts that are available there, which is about leaving out relevant data. Anyway, because the fossil record is sparse on an awful lot of these critters, they're only known from their head crests or a little skitter-scatter a little bit here along, which allows them to be identified phylogenetically, but not telling you much about the whole body. The origin of how that pteroid bone originated in pterosaurs is a possibly unresolvable mystery. If we had living pterosaurs to look at, it would be way easier, because we'd be able to look at the developmental biology of them, and we'd be able to look at the genetics of what is the thing divining. Wouldn't it all surprise me that an awful lot of the same toolkit that generate bone structures, bone morphological protein, and all that would probably be playing a role in that. But we don't have living pterosaurs to look at, so boop, can't do that. This does not mean, however, that it's not possible to work back through the phylogenetic analysis into working out ancestors. Now, what is glaringly missing from Sarfati and Tay is how many pterosaur kinds there are. Just one? A bunch? How the Ark Encounter deals with the bunch is a different matter, because they're basically riffing again off the family structure. But the fact of the matter is that Sarfati and Tay are appearing in the 2020s, 2022, And they have not alluded to a 2020 paper from Ezcurra et al., which, alas, is not open access, although I do personally have a copy of the bloody thing, suggesting that Lagerpetids, which are slender little reptiles from 237 to about 210 million years ago, and thus about 18 million years prior to the first known pterosaurs, are a really good candidates. So they're not paying attention to any of that, although that Ezcurra paper has peripherally been alluded to by, I think, Beckley over in the ID camp. Anyway, we'll be able to give you, still waiting for Rocks for their audiobook. Yes, you may be waiting a while for that, because that's audiobooks, I think, of the kind of material that we have with our footnotes and the like would be horrendous to try to work out. It would really involve a major league revamp. Now, of course, hey kids, anybody know any publishers out there that deal with this kind of thing or deal with audiobooks? We're perfectly willing to make a deal on that kind of thing. Likewise for illustrated editions of the books, et cetera, and so forth and so on. We'll worry about that, but at the moment, want to get Rocks for their volume 2 out of the way. Anyway, Riley Black, who is one of those trans people. It's flipped over. She used to have a different name in the past. At any rate, there's a Scientific American article from Riley on a discussion on the Ezcurra paper that goes into an awful lot of the details and quotes one of the lead authors, Nesbitt, that Lagerpetids would have had the basic body form and skull anatomy of what we think was the common ancestor of pterosaurs and Lagerpetids, adding that Lagerpetids are essentially flightless pterosaurs. The connection between the connections go beyond the skeleton. Lagerpetids and pterosaurs also share some peculiar brain and inner ear anatomy, hinting that abilities important to flight, such as coordinating movements of the head, eye, and neck, evolved while the latter reptiles' ancestors were still on the ground. Presence in Lagerpetids of neuroanatomical features that were previously linked to the origin of flight in pterosaurs indicates that they instead appeared before the acquisition of flight and were exploited later by pterosaurs, allowing them to conquer the sky, says Ezcurra, a paleontologist at the Bernardino, Rivadavia, Natural Sciences Argentine Museum and the University of Birmingham in England. So it's a really interesting little area here because the people involved, there's a Rodrigo Muller 2022, which I will be putting a link up to, another paper not on their list, although the date of it is quite close to the publication date of Sarfati and Tay, so we'll let them off the hook on this one, explores the niche partitioning implications of the pterosaurs and how they were dealing with the eventually birds and also various critters that are living at the time. Lagerpetids are Muller's wheelhouse, by the way, and their relations are both to pterosaurs and dinosaurs. I think it's a rather intriguing issue about the failure of creationists to follow through on their own position. That if their model were as, oh, good heavens, Windows is coming up wanting to do a stupid little restart thing. God damn it. Oh, yikes. We're going to have to pause a moment while I instruct the stupid laptop as to a time to go. Let's try, there we go. Let's go 4 a.m. Oops. Okay. Now I get it. And why will we not? There we go. Okay. And there. Hopefully that will work. Okay, sorry for the delay. It's annoying. It's suddenly I'll get these little restart things where they want to tinker with material right in the middle of the show because I guess they're anticipating that normal people shouldn't be doing anything bloody hell after midnight local time, but I'm not a normal. So there we go. Yes, I was just watching a video. Teaching stuff won't become illegal. Yes, that's going to be a funky little world. Remember, though, the Trumpistas only have about a year before the crash, and things are going to change the dynamic in a hurry once that happens, but that's another matter. I was just watching a video about pterosaur fuzz being protofeathered. Some paleontologists fund indicated feathers may have evolved before pterosaurs. That's with qualifications. We know already that feathers and hair, and the fancier word would be integuments, that are found in both mammals and birds, have a fundamental similarity in their really deep developmental biology. The difference between pimpling out versus dimpling in, and I can never remember which one the feather is, but basically the same gene systems, and then it takes on a completely different dynamic because of selection pressure. We allude to that in volume 1 in considerable detail. It is not then unreasonable, and especially since some of these kind of filamentous integuments are known in ornithischian dinosaurs as well. The tail frizzies on the psittacosaurids that are at the basal group for ceratopsids show up that. And so is it implausible that the same genetic systems that would be playing a case for the development of little fuzzy stuff on mammals and birds would be applying as well, even though it's vaguely homologous to, but not feathers per se. Feathers are very, very specific in the way they're formed in the placode, and also with the little frayings and all that kind of stuff. And it's highly unlikely that this kind of fuzz was in that category. But if we had living pterosaurs to look at, bone morphological protein and sonic hedgehog and all the rest that play a role in the development of hair and feathers, I would be gobsmacked if those were playing a part on that as well. So I hope that clarifies the thing for you, Purple. It's an intriguing little thing. This is a relatively recent discovery. It's within the last, 30 years or so that it's become more. There were some Russian paleontologists that were kind of at the forefront because some of these things were being dug up in their domain, and they were making notice that they're saying, this stuff looks like it's fuzzy. And then eventually they found more and more of these that fall into that category. But with anything, when you're dealing with a completely extinct form, you're in the same ballpark with trilobites. I heard the feather ancestor was in a basal archosaur. The genetics and systems for it certainly would go back. And given the fact that synapsids developed this thing as well, this is way earlier. Synapsids are long before the development of the split off with archosaurs and the like. So this is the common kit bag of the integument system and the skin structure of the tetrapods generally. And then that diverges in a variety of ways, but basically the same toolkit for genes. So you don't need to have any new genetic structures on here. It's just their regulation, and then 10 or 20, 30, 40 million years worth of selection pressure to tinker on with that. Now, our little part 2 relates to an older a post from 2023 now. It goes back a little ways, from Taz Walker, who does an awful lot of stuff at CMI. The multiplication mystery of the southern masked weaver bird. This falls into more gee whiz crap. and I'll be putting the link up to that as well. This one has kind of a fun bit because he's rhapsodizing about weaver bird nests without any actual technical sources at all. So it intrigued me to kind of look into what the hell was going on here. The family, and that presumably would be a kind, has 15 genera with 122 species. Most are living in Africa south of the Sahara. And that naturally brings up the issue of how did they get there post-flood? Remember, their ancestors theoretically were on the ark. They could only have had birds I don't think are clean, so they would have only been 2. And so they must have proliferated into all these different species and genera. How fast? After the flood? Don't expect any baraminologist to work that little puppy out, or the biogeography of it. Meanwhile, there was a lot of really interesting science on this stuff. There's a paper from 2022 by Sally Street on the defense aspects of the nests, which is then clarifying a lot about why weaver birds do all of this crap and how it breaks down by groups. Now, by total coincidence, the dear Doljeff on his channel had devoted an entire episode to that very weaver bird issue versus Taz Walker stuff. And I'll be putting the link up into that. And how Walker was trying a kind of stealth, irreducible complexity and gee whiz element. And then Duff explored how diverse the weaver birds and their nesting practices are, and then comparing the matter to the Ark Encounter kind list, where the much larger clade Pteroids is listed as the kind, along with the short-necked giraffid. So even though our CMI doesn't seem to realize it, by bringing up weaver birds, they're in fact dealing with an issue of how many kinds things are and how the gang, the lumpers, hyper lumpers over at the Ark Encounter are having to keep things low. Whereas if you were going to break these things down simply by family, you should have more stuff going on. So animotes, yeah. So that's a further issue that reminds us on any topic, whenever you bump into any creationist bit, whether it's a source-free rhapsody that's on gee whiz, or especially, frankly, I salivate whenever I find a creationist bringing up a technical paper. And this happens typically in, well, Acts and Facts, for example, has, they're now down, I think, to bi-monthly. And that means they've got fewer articles, and there's an awful lot of little sidebar kid stuff and so forth. And so they're having fewer and fewer articles and fewer issues. And so there's less and less chance for the kind of citation hoggy stuff that, Randy Guglielmo will still trot out stuff of that type, which has, Jensen and Tompkins and that crowd will do that sort of stuff. But it's kind of getting less and less dynamic as we move through time. And you still, of course, have their technical literature, Creation Research Society Quarterly, Answers in Genesis Research Journal, Journal of Creation, that sort of stuff, where although Journal of Creation also will just have like letters to the editor and minor league stuff, or it would put up a thing that's like 2 pages long with footnotes that aren't terribly extensive. But whenever you encounter these things with reference fields, make a point of paying attention to those, because then you can measure, if you look at publications from that person over time or publications on that topic over time, you can start looking to see how much of the science literature is being attended to, how much of it isn't, how much of it is retread as they move from one article to another. All of that's before you even get to evaluating the veracity and informativeness of it. You can just look at it from a scholarly methods angle to kind of get a ballpark as to whether or not they're simply retreading and riffing off of earlier material. In this case, Taz Walker wasn't even getting up to the technical literature level. So we've got a thing that where he could theoretically have been bringing out technical points and then bringing up the magnificent and stupendous creation science alternative to this. But sorry, he's not doing that. And that absence is a tremendous indicator of how the creationist movement ain't going to go anywhere any more than it has since the Henry Morris times, 50, 60 years ago, or for that matter, from the general anti-evolutionists going back decades before that, griping about pretty much the same issues that we've got today. So it's going to be fun. I had encountered another thing that kept me busy today. There's a video I encountered that it'll be alluded to in some future work. Probably the next book Jackson and I do on conspiracy thinking and education issues and other stuff. But it was about the homeschooling movement and its relation to the Disproof of God series. I Gave Up God or some such thing. It's a multiple series. The one with Kevin Sorbo and Janine Pirro appears in one of them. Anyway, there's been 4, and apparently there's going to be a 5th one. A YouTube poster that didn't typically do this stuff felt compelled to dive in just a few days ago and look into the details of the thing. And it brings up that whole issue because their videos are railing on about parental rights and the homeschooling movement, which has huge connections to creationism. Not all homeschoolers are creationists, but if you scratch the surface of Ferris's homeschooling movement. Huge chunk of them are favoring young Earth creationist dogmas, and the movie series all effectively had things that were alluding to young Earth creationism and the flood and all that. That, of course, is going to be an exciting time coming up in Trump 2.0, because the idea that the creationists have gone away, or in a Trump 2.0, as Elon Musk and his incel clown posse go rampaging through the federal government, that they won't feel emboldened, just as the anti-abortion wing of the Trumpistas will be emboldened to extend their range. Something that didn't happen in Trump 1.0, but may very well happen in Trump 2.0, which would be doctrinal creationists wanting to get a leg in and have the Supreme Court change Edwards v. Aguilar so that they can teach creationism in schools. Ken Ham is in an interesting phase, because they do, in fact, provide a lot of books. There's also a Becca, and I think it's called ACE. I'd have to remember all the little fiddly bit details on these things, but there's a broad range of material. The intelligent design movement has tried to kind of inveigle their way into this stuff, but not, I think, all that successfully. Joel Duff or some of the other people that may be following the creationist movement at that grassroots level a bit more than I'm able to do, can weigh in if I'm off the mark on that. But I don't know that Casey Luskin brand of intelligent design apologetics, except some of the videos that they churn out, Michael Denton and various others, Steve Meyer and that have all various done videos, and Gunter Beckley and the like, that very possibly would be in that field. There's an awful lot. A 2009 book on the homeschooling movement that the video I had seen alluded to had actually dive into that. And of the 6 families that he was investigating, this researcher, one of them was overtly creationist. They were down in Oregon, and they were proud of the fact that they didn't watch regular mainstream television. They were subscribed to World Magazine, which is a culture camp conservative screed, and were slavishly delighted with all the stuff they could see from CMI and AIG and ICR, Creation Magazine and all that stuff. And so from their worldview, they're getting a constant glossy reinforcement of a completely imaginary worldview that's missing 90% of the data field. Now, any of their kids in their group, if they ever do bump into things outside of that, they're going to be in the same boat that Erica Gutsick-Gibbon and various other people are. But when they find that the big world, that there was so much data that their worldview was not telling them about, then there is often a crisis of faith that goes along with it. Started to refer to Elon Musk as apartheid Ken. Yeah, he's an interesting little background. Plus, from kind of an abusive family background. I mean, the psychologist will be having a field day with that personality just as much as with Trump, whose brain continues to deteriorate. They're preening now about the Gulf of America thing, although supposedly Google Earth was supposed to be changing the thing for the American audience from Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. But I've looked a couple times, just a couple days ago, in fact, and it's still Gulf of Mexico. And if you try to put in a search for Gulf of America, you'll find an assortment of companies that have some name a little like that, but not the body of water that all of us normal people are going to continue to call the Gulf of Mexico. And apparently there's been huge pushback up in Alaska about Trump's decision to rename Mount Denali back to Mount McKinley. He's got this thing about McKinley. That's another thing which is to think about, his obsessive, delusional brain, dementia brain, gradually working back to like the 1970s. So he's got little bits and pieces of things that churn around in his head that he cycles around. I don't know, for those of you who don't listen to Trump typically, he's just grating voice and he never says anything really relevant, but you can get snippets and look at what policies are the case. But one of the recent things he had is when he was rhapsodizing about the word groceries, like it's a new word or an amazing old word that somehow people didn't use or were using something other than that. And so you have to wonder, what the hell is going on in that guy's head? And then sit back and go, holy shit, he's president of the United States? Whoa. Well, don't blame me. I voted for Harris. So, catch you later. Watch it when you can. Yeah. About 25 minutes in, let me put my little thank you note for our dear people who have continued to hold on to the Patreon support. I can assure you that it makes a big difference. And also, everybody that's on the list, make sure that you check and monitor your finances and the like in the coming years, because, boy, things could get really dicey. And as much as I value everybody that helps support the project, take care about your own personal finances and that first. So I have to be behind the curve on primary things. Hopefully, in the coming cataclysm, it will be of a different level internationally. We had a circumstance where back in the 1930s, just about every major economic power was engaging in absolutely harebrained wrong economic policies. The United States, of course, had its crash, and the Federal Reserve, the guy that helped found the thing had died, and so there was a new breed that was in the Federal Reserve, and they were trying to hold on to their monetary gold reserves to save for a rainy day. Never mind that everyone was drowning outside. Trump went to a grocery store because he had never done. Oh yes, the odds that Trump is a frequenter of bodegas or anything equivalent to that is absolutely ludicrous. The man lives in a totally insular bubble. Anyway, back to the 1930s and the Great Depression period, where you have a whole suite of things. The Bank of England, so the United States Federal Reserve was holding on to its gold reserves. Gold was draining into the United States from Britain because Montague Norman at the Bank of England was trying to maintain the pound at $5 per pound, and that was too high, so gold was just draining into the United States. The French were trying to squeeze the Germans because of their revenge after what had happened to them in World War I. The German government was basically going okay with this under the disastrous assumption that if the German people were suffering enough, the other powers would relent and release them from the Versailles Treaty restrictions. And so it was just a mess. By the time you already had Mussolini in Italy, it's a major economic structure. You had some counterparts of today's Orbans in Eastern Europe in that period. But we have a different structure in that we have a much more invigorated but not perfect European Union. Britain, although it's outside the system, is not oblivious to these things. We do have the tension and circumstance of what's going on with the Ukraine war. Then you also have the dynamics of what's going on in India and Malaysia and other areas that are potentially economic powerhouses. And if they insulate themselves as much as possible, even the PRC, it's not in the interest of mainland China for the United States economy, one of their big trading partners, to suddenly go down the tubes. So it's hi, Barbara. Primary cause of World War II was the treaty that ended World War I. Yes, well, I won't go so far as say primary, but certainly it generated a series of problems that were going to be exacerbated in times to come. Whether or not World War II would ever have happened if the economies of the world hadn't fallen into a cataclysmic global depression is an experiment we can't replay, although maybe we're going to kind of be replaying it in the policies that are being done today. The Hoover administration instituted high tariff protections, the Holly Smoot tariff, that didn't help at all. Later in the 30s, before Roosevelt came in, there were expulsions of Latino migrants. The most massive up until the 1950s under Eisenhower, which took place in his recession. So the idea that expelling migrants on a significant scale helps the economy is just flat out wrong. Plus, the 1920s had been a period when they had given up on the open immigration policy, with the caveat that we had eliminated Chinese immigration since the Exclusion Act back in the 1880s. But everybody else basically was freebies. And we pulled the plug on that. So, of course, there was a lot of xenophobia at the time because people were coming in from other countries, the wrong sorts of people, which, of course, we've changed over periods to where nobody today in the standard white racist land would be thinking of people from Italy or Greece or the like as being the wrong sorts of white people. But back in the 1920s, absolutely. And so you had a very much an Anglo-Saxon prejudice, although I think you could probably find some nincompoops in that range today. But so it's not the same dynamic as was the case in the 1920s and 30s, but it's worrisomely similar. So if there are enough level heads outside of the United States that when the big crunch takes place here, that they insulate it in such a way that it doesn't reverberate into a mess abroad, that will be a positive sign. Once the Transcontinental Railroad was finished, we had no need for Chinese or Irish. Yes, that was, well, the Irish labor, they were, it was an interesting little dynamic. Chinese, of course, were coming in on the Pacific coast. Irish were arriving on the East Coast. And so a lot of them then stayed. They eventually became the political dynasties that you saw in Boston and other places, the Kennedy family and others that gained prominence over time. An enormous amount of anti-Catholic sentiment still persisted in there. But there were the Irish workers for the railroads and the Chinese workers for the railroads. A lot of them stayed put and had communities. Sometimes the Chinese communities were upended and expelled. Other times they kind of laid low all through the West. And it was a very, very complicated dynamic that had an awful lot of stuff that I alluded to it a little bit kind of around the side in volume 1, the first of the Paralogs of Fog stories. More little fun. You actually learn some little historical stuff along with the fantastical space fiction and time traveling Phileas Fogg and all the rest. So I'm sneaking in my historical context and my philosophical views of things, in addition to what I hope is an entertaining romp of the Foggs doing all their little things in various spots in the world. And I'm continuing all of that. And in fact, in the current third novel that I'm working on, I'm knee deep in the issues of the burgeoning radical movement that was taking place in Russia under the Tsars, and that would eventually be connecting up with a lot of Western European anarchist movements that will be in some later books, but it was really starting to kick in the 1880s and 1890s. There was almost an assassination of the Month Club going on of political leaders and monarchs. If not directly assassinated, then assassination attempts. And they were anarchists blowing up cafes in Paris in the 1890s. I mean, so it was an exciting time to live. There we go. But that stuff was, a lot of that was having its roots in a churning amount of social foment that was taking place in Russia in the 1870s. Some of them went to be emigres. In fact, there was a little cluster of Russian revolutionaries that had a little commune in Kansas in the 1870s. It's absolutely fascinating. So you never get people to buy your novels if they hear they will be risk learning history. Yeah, there are people who actually write historical novels, and people actually get them, James Michener and all that in the past. But it's painless, I promise. It's painless stuff. In fact, rather funny. So many of the people are very droll. If anyone recalls our national treasure, Mark Twain, his commentaries on things, I try to get that same kind of snarky vibe for the discussion of the various political histories and things that are going on. So this is more than Jules Verne did. Verne wrote, I think he probably had maybe a surprisingly liberal slant on things, and may have been not religious to boot, but kept that very much on the sidebar, as he made a nice living writing fantastical adventures. But every once in a while, he would kind of sidle close to issues about like monetary issues of what happens if you found an asteroid of gold and what it would have on the economy and all of that. So it's a quirky little element to him. In the same way, I don't think he was nearly as overt as H.G. Wells was with his left-wing socialism and attitudes about women's rights and obsessions. He had some prejudice against Catholics and others, in part because of a very bad upbringing that he had, very poverty-stricken and stunted growth environment. So a recurring theme in his novels, which, by the way, are more than just science fiction things. His novels are basically social commentary and the like. They're not science related at all. Most of his science fiction stories that are famous are ones that he did in the late 19th century. But he would often have a little obsessive details about eating things that probably was in the fact that he was often close to a starvation diet when he was just a kid. Tough little quirky times for old HG. Anyway, the historical end of it, I can't avoid thinking historically in the same way that anybody that reads the Rocks for Their stuff are going to be have got background on what happened earlier. When did people come up with ideas? Are ideas that are currently being presented new ones, or ones that are just retreading somebody else's idea? And to what extent does the process evolve over time? And you have things that were obsessive in one generation fade away, and you have a completely different set of tropes that pop along. And so that historical end of things gives you a broader context, because if all you do is just dive in to see what a little niche creationist believes, you're not necessarily realizing that there's a broad spectrum of creationism, and that position that you're seeing is not necessarily shared by others in that field. So there's tons of stuff that we'll be putting in, including an absolutely juicy little chart listing off all the different dates for the flood in the creationist canon, that I think you'll be surprised how many there are. That if all you do is know about ICR and AIG, they're going with Bishop Usher's 2348 BCE. But that's only one of many positions by creationists who are entirely drawing on the Bible. None of these are secular estimates. All viewpoints, depending upon how you date the various, which text you use, Masoretic versus the other translations, and when you figure out when you want Adam to be born, and because everything kind of connects up to work their way down, how many years after creation does the flood take place? And boy, it's thousands of years range, even within the existing texts. So anyway, we're a little past half hour. Anybody got any charming little questions on any topic whatsoever before I put up the shameless plug advert for the Rocks for There? I'll see whether anything is materialized after I put up the show. I would imagine theoretically Peter will be coming up with a new version once we get Rocks for There 2 out of the way. And likewise for the future works. I would suspect we may very well have a little visit on Apologia's show. He did a little advert for our work. And maybe some of these other ones will have some little adverts for it and interviews. We'll find out. That will happen when we get the book done and operational. Between the two of them, it will be a massive compendium of both the science data and just how gobsmackingly stupid creationists can be, and all the different cross connections on things. Amazing, amazing, amazing. It's weird to think the people in the Trump administration that are connected to Stu Peters, who thinks that dinosaurs aren't real. It's pseudoscience central for the next 4 years. And we'll be picking up the pieces in years to come, assuming we have any government left by the time they get through with it. Okie doke. Good Canadian historian Pierre Bertin, in my humble opinion. What's Bertin's area of focus? Vesta. the name doesn't ring a bell with me. What areas does he deal with? Pierre Bertrand. I can Google it, I suppose, if worse comes to worse. But I thought to get from the horse's mouth there. There's an awful lot of historians that I've drawn on in specialized areas. Some of the little projects lurking in my head for future is a big epic on the Roman Empire, fictional, SPQR. Fascinated with the French Revolution through the Napoleonic period down to the Congress of Vienna. That would be tricolor. And then there's also the whole saga of Eleanor of Aquitaine and her various life, because she has her time before Henry II, the stuff way before we bump into Lion and Winter period. And then she outlived Henry and went on a crusade with King Richard, her son, and outlived him, and lived a chunk of the ways into King John, the Magna Carta doofus. So, wow, what a chronological range on that little puppy. Anyway, so even beyond the works that I have definitely scheduled to keep me busy for the next 10 or 20 years, there are things beyond that if I live long enough, I will continue working on. And my desired goal is to keel over dead on my keyboard working on the next project. That would be a happy camper thing. I don't want to be one of these folks that deteriorates in some dreadful nursing home with little tubes stuck in them and doing absolutely nothing. That would be hell on earth for me. So anyway, everybody stay super duper safe in the various weather cycles and messes that we're having. And keep an eye out for the wooden penguins and also the incel clown posse rampaging around. Various ice thugs trying to round up the wrong people and the like. It's going to be an interesting time ahead. So everybody, again, stay safe, and we will be catching you all next week. Au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, aloha.